as I was mentioning, there are, based on the conversations that we've had this morning and the results from the Project Developers Forum benchmarking survey, there are a multitude of views about the role of DFIs as it relates to early stage financing, the provision of grants, the role that development partners can play in this particular process. And we really want to use this panel and this opportunity to bring some key stakeholders together to share their alternative views, one, two, to really begin to look at the types of innovations that are possible, and then not just sort of walk away identifying that, you know, these are the challenges, but see who can individually or collectively provide the leadership that the industry really needs. I think we all understand that we can, in our own individual facilities, capacities, bring projects to a certain point, but getting it over the line, you know, I was saying to Lyda earlier, that some of the conversations we're having now about working with governments or building the project development practitioners community from the private sector standpoint, these conversations have been going on for quite some time. So what we really want to be able to do is, how can we collate a lot of that knowledge and really seek to lay down some foundational steps about how the community can perhaps take a more lateral as opposed to vertical view on driving some of these projects to financial close, which is the theme that we have today. So in this respect, I'm joined by a number of experts and panelists. So we have Lyda Fitz, who is the Regional Director for Sub-Saharan Africa at the US Trade and Development Agency. I know you're all hungry, but perhaps a little round of applause for Lyda. Just to warm her up might work well. And please don't make Bertrand feel isolated by not giving him a round of applause. So I have Bertrand Belbin, senior, yes, clap for ourselves. The road to lunch. Yes, so Bertrand is the Senior Business Development Manager at Infraco with an additional special responsibility for East Africa. Then I have Chinua Azubuike, who is the CEO of InfraCredit. No round of applause, and I think that you'll be very pleased and interested to hear what Chinua has to say, because I think one of his major shareholders is here today, and we keep talking about this whole topic of the ability or the level of interest for institutional capital on the one hand, but then African institutional capital on the other, to be able to deploy and allocate to project development and infrastructure in Africa. And I think Chinua's got a unique story to say in that respect. And last but not least, we have Emmanuel Matz, who is the Head of Strategy, Energy and Infrastructure at Propaco. So the essence of the focus of this session is really going to be to get, hopefully, the speakers to provide candid and constructive insights and proposals and recommendations to forward-looking opportunities. I think it's very clear today that, you know, we've taken stock in many respects of some of the challenges. I think what we really want to do is be able to draw on the panelists' expertise in terms of what are some of the things that can potentially be done different, taking stock of the lessons learned in terms of where we are. And lessons learned in the context of, you know, good opportunities and strategies to crowd in early stage capital and commercial capital and institutional capital into project development. And this sort of missing issue of how can we accelerate financial close, drawing on our own experiences, and any ideas around, you know, how the DFI and development partner community could potentially accelerate their response times in terms of their participation, if necessary at all. I think we'll have a conversation about that. I'd like to just get your views, Bertrand, and yours, Lyda, as well, about Chinua's model. Is that something that you would take a serious look at? Is it the type of platform that you think there's a natural fit and good role for you going forward, anticipating where the market's likely to be in sort of 5 to 7 years, and the sort of macro big objectives of crowding in this institutional money, but perhaps taking a more horizontal as opposed to vertical view of the sort of pipeline and the sort of supply issues around infrastructure?
I got to do it.
I think the pitch philosophy is kind of that. And sorry, I'm banging about pitch. At the end of the day, they are my employer, so I have to. But within the pitch, you have everything except the developer. So you have early stage money, the infracos, because by the way, there's Infraco Asia that exists as well, same mandate as us. Followed by EAF, Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund, and they can come towards us, I would say, as well as senior debt. They are a bit on the mezzanine side when it comes to construction. They could. There used to be GAP, Green Africa Power, it no longer exists. I think EAF have taken over their mandate to a certain degree. You also have the guarantors who help basically promoting local currency, but who are also creative in terms of products they use. So I think there's an idea there to use. By the way, we're multilaterally funded. We have a couple of big governments funding us, funding pitch, and therefore funding the facilities within pitch. There's another facility, by the way, that's called grant funding, so it's TAF, Technical Assistance Facility. But I think that the point I'm trying to make is this horizontal integration, where through the project cycle, in theory, within pitch, you have basically an answer to your need, depending on where you are in the project development. And we've seen this replicated, Climate Investor One, they have exactly the same story, kind of achieving the same goal, I would say, but differently set up. IFC was there ages ago, way before all of us, where you have the whole chain. IFC Infraventure kind of take the early risk, and then you have all the IFC suite there available. And I feel we're trying to address that. Can it be addressed better by all of us? Definitely. When at the end of every year we count the number of projects done and we're like, wow, we've closed 10 projects that year and we're all clapping.
Can I stick with you on that? Definitely. Could you unpack that definitely a bit more in terms of what would you change? What would you propose to make it better?
Is the panel allowed to say, hey, the panel doesn't know?
Again?
Yeah. I don't know, we'll market ourselves better, work together. It's kind of the same thing again. Advocacy, work with governments. The issue is about aligning interests, really, because we all come from different angles on all these things, and everybody is trying to pull the cover his way or her way. And that's a difficulty. And you have to have disappointment from all parties, equally shared, I would say, so projects happen. A project will never have zero risk, otherwise there would be zero return. So we should be clear on that. And then it's how you optimize the risk distribution to make sure the project ultimately serves the Africans in terms of, what I have in mind when I say that, I mean the lowest possible tariff. And there are some success stories. I think the South African program is a success story. This morning, the Get Fit in Uganda is another one. And it's by working all together and not competing between DFIs that will make it work. That's my conviction. Maybe my grandchildren will see the color of that.
Let's hear Lyda's views. And again, if you could just also touch on this point of the extent to which you can crowd in longer-term institutional money. You've heard a pension fund from Uganda, Richard here, who heads one of the funds here, saying, how can I participate? Is there a way that if you're intermediating and in some cases articulating the frameworks out there for key sort of constituents, is there a way that you can perhaps help the African Pension Fund community get access to some of the opportunities that you have?
So I would say, first of all, what I think is most exciting about the model, from my perspective, is how it is catalyzing local financing. That ability to have local currency, but also local risk perception, which is also often very different from international risk perception, I think is a real opener to a lot of project movement that might otherwise be slowed or not move at all. So that's been something that we have benefited from in terms of projects that have then gone into financing from regional development banks or local development banks, but also the success, I think, across the board on project bond issuances in Africa demonstrates the appetite of local the appetite of local investors and investors generally into the market, specifically when it's not project specific. So that I think is exciting. And the close, I mean, we are very early on. So usually we're really not intersecting with a pension fund. Who often don't even want to touch greenfield, much less not even yet to the field, or just to design the project. But knowing that there are, we do track and support our projects, up to and past financial close. So being able to connect to more and more of these institutions to say, here's our portfolio, here's what we've already vetted and stamped. If we could use some of that if you could take some of the credence of our vetting and then shorten your own time frame or risk allocation to these projects, I think there's some partnerships to be potentially there.
So the partnership, Chinua, how would you seek to take that forward?
Thank you. So it's something we're very keen on exploring, and I think to the earlier point I made about what type of structure, vehicle, partnership, or model we could evolve to. I think looking at like an infraco Africa model, which covers Africa, but the view is you increasingly need in-country replications of these facilities to have maximum impact and sustainable impact as well, and more efficiency. So we would be exploring how best these models could be domesticated and now rely for technical assistance and capacity to the out-country entities. So, but firstly, I think we're already having these conversations already with all of at least with USAID and with Infraco Africa, who's also, we have a broader relationship from the Pitch group, and also some of the developers here. It's really how to coordinate and have a structural approach to maximizing these opportunities. There is appetite. If you speak to local governments, or if you speak to the governments, even the state governments, there is clearly a budget deficit that is growing. Lagos State, for example, only finances its capex about 30%, and its population growth is about 3% per annum. So there's clearly a deficit that needs to be financed, and it cannot be financed by the government going forward from their balance sheet. So there is fiscal constraints that would force that discipline, that would require that they have to sit on the table with private sector to formulate the best model that would ease the constraints on their balance sheet, create jobs and sustainability for their markets. And we're increasingly having those sort of conversations. And I think even within Lagos, as an example, there is a drive to initiate what you call the embedded power program. They want to crowd in private capital to fund about an expansion plan of 3,000 megawatt in Lagos. There's a clear policy statement in that regard. The regulation has been put in place. Now it's attracting that capital, and they are willing to work with the private sector to develop a framework that would make this sustainable. So we're seeing a willingness, and I think what particularly we've experienced over the past year and we see as a strong benefit is the use of capital markets, whether directly or indirectly. What capital markets brings is it brings market discipline, it brings transparency and sustainability. And so being able to develop or have a coordinated approach means that if you have secondary investors setting out what they want to see, and they're clearly the same conditionalities that you would like to see for predictability and certainty, and you have the early stage developers and other counterparties setting out the terms, you probably would see more incentive from the government side because they can see a clear linkage across the value chain. That's our thinking, and certainly looking to exploring this. So I do hope that at the next summit, we should have a case study to talk about, or some progress to talk about, because for us it's actually critical that we unlock early stage financing in a manner that creates more bankable operating assets. Otherwise, we will keep having this conversation over and over again.
Emmanuel, are you going to support Chinua here by hopefully preventing this conversation from being a recurring one and be part of that pilot program?
Yeah, with pleasure. But on my side, I would like to leverage on what was just said. I think that if we want Africa to develop itself, there is clear need for developers and for local developers to be on the deals. There is clear need for local banks to be on the deals, for local institutions to be on the deals. And we will be trying more and more to support that, because it is a must, and yeah, it is for when you are saying what could we do more better, I believe that this is an answer.
Fantastic. So we can open the floor now for 3 questions, I think. Okay, that's one. Everyone hungry, or is it just we've covered everything?
I mean, thanks to the panel. Just a very quick one. I mean, the title of this panel is Development Innovations, and if we look at the backdrop of it, the deficit we face is huge. I mean, you made the example of Lagos. I mean, one thing I often told the governor of Lagos is Lagos's budget is 1 trillion naira, which is probably about the biggest. I mean, Lagos would be about the 6th largest economy in Africa if you were a country of its own. But as a percentage of GDP, that spend is only 2% of the GDP of Lagos. So the money is minuscule in terms of making any impact. So there's this huge financing out there. We've got project development. So my question to the panel is, how can we accelerate projects to market? How can we learn from, you spend 5 years doing a project in Chad. You come across the border in Nigeria, spend another 5 years developing a fairly very similar project. While I do recognize that countries are different, how can we introduce an assembly line approach? Where you develop a set of standards, and you can, basically pull things together. And it may not be 100% of it, but 80% of it to accelerate project. Because what I'm afraid of is that, look, we're heading towards a social crisis. In terms of what is needed to solve this problem. I always tell our president, he says, if we don't kill corruption, corruption will kill us. But for me in Africa, if we don't kill our infrastructure deficit, the deficit will kill us, or in fact, it's killing us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chidi. Any other questions before I pass it over to the panel? Okay, I think then. No? Okay, so then perhaps we'll start with you, Emmanuel. We'll come down and perhaps you might incorporate your closing comments.
Yeah, I think that standardization is part of the answer, and what all the lenders have been involved in in having Azure Power as a benchmark in Nigeria has really been a tough involvement in order for this type of project then to be leveraged, and then for the next IPPs to be leveraged on the same basis. Unfortunately, the government has not supported the idea, and despite all the investment that has been done on these projects, we all know where the solar.
Chinua?
Well, I do agree that there certainly needs to be a different approach, and I agree that being able to learn from global experiences or from case studies is why we even exist as an entity today, because of the collaboration between the Nigerian Sovereign Wealth Fund and Garanco, which Garanco has been providing guarantees for over a decade and replicated the model locally, and so we're the first domestic credit enhancement facility for infrastructure. So again, it's really to that logic of saying that if this can happen, then how do you, the logical extension of a credit enhancement facility, how do you logically extend that to a project, early stage project development facility, and how could that work in a way that there's a symbiotic relationship between that and the secondary market, bringing in the governance best practices and technical expertise. So conceptually, I do agree that we need to do that so that we don't have to say the same thing over and over again. I think in terms of execution, I guess from the panel discussion, there's clearly an appetite to explore this, whether you call it an innovation or more coordination. Execution-wise, I imagine we're more than willing to work with counterparties that are interested in, because for us it's bringing sustainability to the infrastructure value chain, and certainly willing to work with counterparties to ensure that there is coordination, appropriate risk allocation, and aligned incentive across the value chain.
Okay, thank you. Bertrand?
Yeah, thanks for the good question. Well, not much to add, to be honest, other than DFIs or DFIs alike. If you think of InfraCo, which is not really a DFI, but DFIs or DFIs alike have a massive problem and cannot concentrate all their money into Lagos. We have to do more. I felt you were asking for that. Having said that, the little bit of innovation we're going to try to do in Lagos is actually on marine transport, as opposed to power, because also our view of Lagos/Nigeria is that the private sector is a well-running machine in that space, which is not the case in other countries. So instead of going power in Nigeria/Lagos, we're going to go marine transport. We are not just power, even though our portfolio is majority power. Our remit is water, potable water, transport, and power. A last thing I'm going to say, and it's not targeted to Lagos or Nigeria, one thing that will put an InfraCo off, or a pitch off, or a DFI off, and they'll run away from it, is corruption. So, and all that led me to think is, if Lagos is the third country by GDP, according to what you said, why isn't Lagos helping Lagos? There's money there. It's the sixth country by GDP. There's an inherent issue if Lagos is not helping Lagos. And if there's an inherent issue, it's not a country or a couple of countries which are thousands of miles away from it that are going to be able to solve that inherent problem in Lagos. So, food for thought before actual food. Thanks.
Well, there's actual food out there, but I think we have an inherent issue. I think we have an inherent issue here, which is ultimately, what role, what level of innovation, what degree of leadership can development partners and DFIs play to at least accelerate the attainment of financial close. So I think I'd like Lida to just bookend us with her views on that before we close the session.
Well, I think that Nigeria is a great sort of case study in ways that things that can be done, and we actually are pretty excited about Lagos as a market structure, as a setup of clearly defined rules. Emmanuel talked a little bit about some of the frustration of the solar projects in the north. Where there is an ability to set out clear guidelines and investors responded quickly to that, it does really shorten the timeline. It'd be great to see that those projects actually get to the finish line before rules are changed. So I think that you're already seeing in Nigeria, investors respond to some of the early stages of power sector reform bill and the flare gas capture in light of Lagos. Those models and looking at models elsewhere, like the REAP in South Africa, I think that some of our role is helping to share with governments what the real dividends and deferred dividends are of having clear models, sticking to them, and then letting the private sector, just sitting back and letting the private sector respond to them and bring the money that they will do, and shown time and time again, when there is a clear pathway and ability to get to the finish line.
Well, thank you very much. And with that said, and in the interest of time, please join me in thanking my panel for their inputs.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.